I always say that Kentucky has two main scents, bourbon and melody. You feel the heat of fermentation in the air and, right after that, you hear the music. Not radio music. It's the sound of a banjo cutting through the morning mist, a fiddle crying at dusk. It's the soul of the land, pulsing along the famous Bluegrass Highway. And it's on that road, in that musical heart, that we do our work. My name is Jackson, and my partner, Eleanor, is the kind of person who sees what's behind the mirror. I'm the straight-line guy, the paperwork guy, the one who drives the old pickup. She's the one who listens to the silence. We're private detectives, but out here in the countryside, we work more like a pair of ghost hunters who don't believe in ghosts. At least, I didn't. It all started at the end of last summer, when the music stopped for good. The victim, the first one that caught our attention, was an old man named Silas. A skinny old fellow, skin weathered by sun and wind, who played the banjo as if the instrument were an extension of his own heart. He was a busker, a street musician, the kind who lives off the coins tossed into a hat. Silas had a regular spot in Bardstown, right by the roadside. Everyone knew him. He was there, playing Foggy Mountain Breakdown with the energy of a kid, and the next day, poof, gone. It wasn't the first time a musician had vanished in the area. Over the past 2 years, the local police had shelved 3 similar cases, always people who lived off their art, without strong roots, without family that would raise much noise. They travel, the sheriff said. They hit the road, head to Nashville, try their luck. But Eleanor didn't buy that story. Jackson, she said as we looked at the spot where Silas used to set up his little stool. The air was heavy, smelling of wet earth and stale cigarette smoke. Street musicians don't just vanish like that. They live for the audience. They might leave, but they leave the instrument behind. It's like a fisherman abandoning his rod. Eleanor was crouched down, examining the asphalt. She had a way of moving that made it seem like she was always searching for something only she could see. Eleanor, his banjo disappeared with him, I reminded her, jotting down the statement of a nearby shop owner. The man swore he'd seen Silas at 10 at night, playing something new, something he'd never heard before. Exactly. The instrument was taken. But look at this. She showed me a crack in the sidewalk, near where the stool usually sat. It wasn't anything special, just a fissure. But Eleanor pointed to the fine dust inside it. This is bow rosin, Jackson. Fiddle rosin. Silas played banjo. The last one who vanished, Mary, played the flute. The guy before her, Billy, played the harmonica. But all of them left a trace of fiddle rosin, subtle, at the place where they disappeared. I scratched my head, feeling the sun warm the back of my neck. Fiddle rosin? Is it a trail? A warning? No. It's the predator's signature, she corrected, using the word I was trying to avoid. Someone is hunting these musicians. And the hunter, he uses a fiddle. Or at least carries one. Eleanor had this habit of naming threats. Saying the predator out loud made the mystery feel less like an accident and more like a planned ambush. We decided to focus not on what Silas left behind, but on what he did before he vanished. The music. We spent 3 days talking to everyone who had passed through the square that night. The waiter, the truck driver, the woman walking her dog. Most of them remembered the sound, but not the melody. It was just another banjo on the Bluegrass Highway. Until we found Pete. Pete was a kid of about 15, hair falling into his eyes, who sold lemonade near the square. He was a fan of Silas. He had a little old cassette recorder, the kind people used in the 90s, and he always recorded the old man's performances. I recorded the last song, Mr. Jackson, he said, clutching the recorder to his chest. But it wasn't really a song. It sounded like he was talking to the banjo. We took Pete to the pickup and he pressed play. The sound that came off the tape sent chills down my spine. It was banjo, yes, but distorted, almost frantic. It didn't have the cheerful cadence of traditional bluegrass. They were loose, fast notes, repeated in strange sequences. It sounded like Morse code but made of strings. Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing every note. I, in my musical ignorance, heard only chaos. He was improvising, I murmured. Maybe he was drunk, tired? No, Eleanor cut in, her voice low but firm. He was afraid. And he was communicating. Look at the sequence, Jackson. Listen to the pattern. See. Then a sharp slide, a slide up the neck of the instrument, and the sequence repeats, but in a different octave. She grabbed a piece of paper and started drawing lines, as if she were mapping the sound. Think of it like a topographic map. Bluegrass is full of geographic metaphors. Mountain breakdown, cabin in the valley. What if his last song wasn't a farewell, but a coordinate? That idea hit me like a shotgun blast. A coordinate. The musician, at the moment he was taken, or realized he was about to be taken, was using the only language he truly mastered to leave a trail. We spent the entire night in our improvised office, a rented room at a roadside motel that smelled of chlorine and despair. Eleanor, surrounded by maps of Kentucky and sheet music she barely knew how to read, was in her element. She had a crazy theory, but one that made a strange kind of sense. Music has a mathematical structure, Jackson. If you assign a numerical value to each note and use the duration of the note as a multiplier, you get a code. Silas was playing the Bluegrass Highway in code. I was the skeptic, but I trusted her instincts. Eleanor could look at a coffee stain and deduce the brand of the bean and the barista's mood. We took Pete's tape and, using an audio analysis program I barely knew how to operate, broke down Silas's final melody. It took hours, fueled by cold coffee and frustration. The first sequence of 8 notes, Eleanor dictated, running a hand through her hair. They're repeated 4 times, with a bend on the 5th repetition. The bend marks the stop. The change of octave is the change of direction. When we turned the notes into numbers, and the numbers into coordinates, the result was terrifyingly precise. The musical code pointed to a specific area in Spencer County, about 40 miles east of where Silas had vanished. It wasn't a town, it wasn't a farm. It was a dense green blot on the map, the Daniel Boone National Forest, an area known for being labyrinthine and, frankly, frightening. The predator took him into the forest, I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. No, Eleanor corrected, tracing a circle on the map with her fingertip. The predator lives there. And Silas was playing his address. We needed more proof. One case could be coincidence. 4 cases were a pattern, and we had 3 other missing musicians to look into. The second case was Mary's. She had disappeared 6 months earlier, in Lexington. Mary played the Irish flute. Her music was softer, more ethereal. Eleanor tracked Mary's family down to a small town near the Virginia border. Mary's sister, a weary woman named June, received us cautiously. The police said she went after her boyfriend in Chicago, June said as she served us overly sweet tea. Did she leave anything behind, June? Any recording? June shook her head. Just this. She always left me a musical note. Whenever she traveled, she'd play a farewell melody on the phone, on the answering machine. Eleanor and I exchanged looks. The musical note. The answering machine recording was short. Mary's flute sounded sweet, melancholic. It wasn't frantic like Silas's banjo, but the structure was the same. Repetitive sequences, followed by a sustained tone that worked like a full stop. She was crying, Eleanor murmured, listening to the recording for the 10th time. But her crying is a straight line, Jackson. A path. We turned the flute melody into numbers. The result led us back to the same Daniel Boone National Forest, but to a different point, about 10 miles south of Silas's coordinates. The third case was Billy, the harmonica player. He had disappeared almost a year earlier, in Louisville. Billy's case was the weakest, because he was an addict and the police assumed he'd relapsed and died in some alley. But Eleanor had found a witness. An elderly woman who lived across the street from the bar where Billy played. She kept a notebook where she wrote down everything she found interesting, including the songs Billy played. He was nervous that night, the woman told us, adjusting her thick-framed glasses. He played the harmonica like he was trying to scare something away. And the last song, it wasn't happy. It was just a hiss, a moan. The woman's notebook had the perfect musical notation of that last song. The harmonica, instead of clear notes, used breath and air pressure to create tonal variations. The code was complex, based on intervals of blowing and drawing. When we decoded the harmonica, the final point led us back to the Daniel Boone National Forest. A third point, forming a triangle on the map, all within the same stretch of dense woodland. "It's not an address," I whispered, staring at the coffee-stained map. "It's a hunting ground." "And whatever is there, Jackson is listening," Eleanor said, her voice almost inaudible. "It hears the music. It waits for the final sound. And the final sound is the bait and the clue." We were dealing with something that went beyond ordinary crime. The idea that a predator could decipher improvised street music and use it like GPS to hunt was absurd. But the facts were there. I started digging into local folklore. Kentucky is a well of old stories, legends about creatures in the mountains and spirits in the rivers. I looked for anything connected to music, to fiddles, to hunting. And I found it. In Appalachian folklore, there's a whispered legend about the fiddler of the road. It wasn't a ghost, nor a vampire. It was an entity, a being that fed on pure melody, on uncommercialized talent. The legend said the fiddler didn't steal musicians. He invited them to a final song, a contest. And whoever lost became part of the forest. And the fiddler's signature? He always left behind a note from his fiddle, the purest and saddest note, one that resonated in the bones of anyone who heard it. Eleanor looked at my notes, where I had scribbled the legend. "The fiddle rosin, Jackson," she said, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and excitement. "It's not the predator's signature. It's the fiddler trail. He must have come close, played a note on his fiddle, and the rosin dust fell. The fiddler of the road. A folkloric being who hunted street musicians along the Bluegrass Highway and used their final melody as a map to his lair." I was far outside my comfort zone, but the truth was that if we wanted to find Silas, Mary, and Billy, we would have to accept that the world was stranger than I'd thought. "All right, if the fiddler lives in there, we're going to his lair," I decided. Eleanor was already packing her backpack. She put in water, granola bars, a first aid kit, and, oddly enough, a guitar tuner. "Why the tuner?" I asked. "If the melody is the map, we need to know if we're reading the map right. And if we meet him, well, we're going to need music," she replied, with the smile of someone about to jump out of a plane. I grabbed my most powerful flashlight, my hunting knife, and my pistol, even though I knew lead bullets wouldn't do anything against a legend. "We're going into the triangle," I said, looking at the map. Silas's coordinate was the northernmost point. It was the freshest trail. We decided to start there. The map showed a small clearing near a creek that flowed into the Kentucky River. We left before dawn. The pickup swallowed the distance, and soon we traded asphalt for a gravel road that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The Daniel Boone National Forest is dense, dark, even at midday. The trees are tall, and sunlight barely manages to pierce the canopy. I drove slowly, smelling pine and moss. The silence was oppressive. On the Bluegrass Highway, there's always some sound, an engine, a distant chord. Out there, only the creak of the pickup suspension and the sound of our breathing. Eleanor had the map open on her lap. She carried a compass and checked the direction at every turn. "We're getting close to the creek. Silas's coordinate is just a few yards from the eastern bank," she warned. I parked the pickup near a fallen tree and we grabbed our packs. There was no trail. We were stepping into untouched woods. As we walked, Eleanor began to hum. It wasn't a familiar tune. Just a progression of notes, soft and cautious. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice as low as possible. "We're in his home, Jackson. Music draws him in. But we don't want him to know we're hunters. We need to sound like bait." I didn't like the idea of being bait, but I understood the logic. If the fiddler hunted those who played, maybe a weak, hesitant sound would lure him in. We reached the clearing indicated by Silas's melody. It was a beautiful place, but with a morbid beauty. The creek ran fast over smooth stones, but the clearing itself was strangely empty. There were no birds, no insects. And there, in the middle of the tall, damp grass, we found the first piece of evidence that wasn't musical. It was Silas's stool. The small, foldable wooden stool was intact. Beside it lay a small pile of dimes, rusted by moisture. "He was here," I said, kneeling to examine the stool. But Eleanor wasn't looking at the stool. She was staring at a large gray stone near the edge of the creek. "Look," she whispered. On the surface of the stone, there was a scratch. It wasn't an animal mark. It was a fine, precise line, as if made with the tip of a very sharp knife. 3 curved lines followed by a D. "What is that?" "It's musical notation," Eleanor said, pulling the tuner from her backpack. "He left a final note. Not in the music, but here." She held the tuner close to the mark on the stone, as if the device could read a melody etched into rock. "The legend says the fiddler leaves the purest and saddest note," I recalled. Eleanor pressed a button on the tuner. The device beeped. "It's a C-sharp," she said, her voice tight with tension. "But look at the notation. It's not just the note. It's the direction." The 3 curved lines looked like waves. The dot marked the end. Eleanor took the map and drew a straight line from the stone, following the direction of the waves. The C-sharp was the reference point, the key. Jackson, his music brought us here. But the last note he left, his final breath, points to where he was taken. The line Eleanor traced led deeper into the forest, toward the central point of our triangle. The convergence of the 3 melodies. "The lair," I said. "The fiddler doesn't kill the musicians at the hunting ground. He takes them to a place where he can listen to them forever," Eleanor theorized, putting the tuner away. I felt the weight of the gun in my hand. I was ready to face a murderer. But a folkloric predator? I didn't have a manual for that. "We'll follow this direction, Eleanor. But we go slowly. And we don't play any music. No whistling." "Too late," she replied, her expression grim. "The moment you stepped into the clearing, you stepped onto his stage. He already knows we're here. And he's listening." We moved on, following the direction marked by the C-sharp carved into the stone. The forest grew darker, the terrain more difficult. We were climbing a steep hill, covered in slick roots. I paid attention to every snapped branch, every shifting shadow. Eleanor, meanwhile, listened to the silence. "Don't you hear it?" she asked, stopping suddenly. I froze, holding my breath. I could only hear the wind in the trees, the distant sound of the creek. "What is it?" "The absence of sound. There's nothing alive here. No insects, no birds. It's an acoustic vacuum." We kept climbing. With every step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if the forest had eyes. We reached the top of the hill. There, the brush opened to reveal a depression in the ground, a small, isolated valley. And at the center of that valley stood a cabin. It wasn't abandoned. It was well built, made of dark wood, with a stone chimney that looked ancient. There was no smoke, but there was a heavy wooden door, closed. And in front of the cabin, there was a fence. Not a fence meant to keep people out. A fence made of objects. As we drew closer, my stomach turned. The fence was made of musical instruments. Silas's stool, Mary's flute, Billy's harmonica, and many other instruments we hadn't identified. Broken guitars, old mandolins, even an acoustic bass. All of them were driven into the ground, forming a macabre barrier. And hanging at the center of the fence, at its highest point, was a violin. It was made of dark wood, almost black, and seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. It was beautiful and terrifying. "Eleanor, we found the lair," I whispered. "And we're standing right at the door," she replied, drawing her knife from its sheath. "But we can't just break in. We have to enter his game. Remember the legend. It's a competition." I looked at the hanging violin. If the fiddler was inside, he was waiting. "What's the plan?" "We play. We draw him out. And we use music to defend ourselves." Eleanor pulled an old guitar with rusted strings from her backpack, one she'd picked up at a pawn shop in Bardstown. She tuned it quickly with the tuner. "I'm going to play Silas's melody, the map melody. If he's in there, he'll want to know why we know the way." I positioned myself behind a thick tree, gun in hand. I didn't know what to expect. A man? A monster? Eleanor took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The sound of the guitar, even out of tune, sliced through the valley's silence like glass. She played the fast notes, the frantic pattern Silas had used. See, the sound was nervous, frightened. It was the music of someone running. She repeated the sequence 3 times. The valley remained silent. I began to think the cabin might be empty, that the fiddler had gone out hunting. Then, on the 4th repetition, the silence broke. The sound didn't come from the cabin. It came from above, high in the trees. It was the purest and saddest note I had ever heard. A perfect C-sharp, vibrating in the air, resonating in my teeth. It was the sound of the violin hanging on the fence. The sound stopped, and the cabin door slowly opened. He didn't come out running. He walked out calmly, like a host greeting unexpected guests. He was tall, thin, dressed in clean but old-fashioned farm clothes. He wore a felt hat that kept most of his face hidden in shadow. And he held a violin bow, long and polished. The violin itself hung on the fence, but the bow was in his hand, like a weapon. He stopped in the doorway, and I felt the air grow cold. "What an interesting melody," the figure said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. It wasn't a roar or a battle cry. It was the voice of a gentleman annoyed at having his dinner interrupted. "Did you come all this way to play for me?" Such a nervous song. Eleanor stopped playing, but kept the guitar steady in her hands. "We came to get our friends back," she said, her voice firm despite the fear I knew she felt. The fiddler tilted his head, and I finally saw his eyes. They were a pale, icy blue, and they held no human emotion. "Your friends," he repeated. He gestured with the bow toward the fence of instruments. "They're all here. They gave me their last and finest song. And now, you've given me your address." He took a step forward, and the silence in the forest became absolute. I raised my gun, knowing a shot would only serve to anger him. "You know the rule, don't you?" he said softly. "The Bluegrass Highway is a stage, and the stage demands a final performance." He took the violin from the fence, sliding it onto his shoulder with frightening ease. "Play for me," he ordered. "Play the song you used to find me. And if it's good enough, maybe I'll let one of you walk away." "Maybe." Eleanor looked at me, and I understood. We had the map, but now we needed the key. We had to play the music that unraveled the mystery, the music he wouldn't be able to ignore. "I'll play," Eleanor said, pointing the guitar at him. "But not Silas's song. I'll play the song that binds all of them together." She began to strum. It wasn't bluegrass. It was a slow, deep melody, built from the key notes of Silas, Mary, and Billy, woven into a complex harmonic progression. It was the song that revealed the predator. The fiddler smiled, a thin, cold smile. He raised the bow, ready to answer her melody with his own and begin the musical duel that would decide who left the Daniel Boone National Forest alive. I knew Eleanor's melody was our only chance, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The stage was set, and the music was about to begin. I smelled wet earth and pine, thick and heavy, as we moved through the darkness of the Daniel Boone National Forest. The silence there wasn't restful, it was oppressive. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for the first sound. Cold sweat ran down my back, but not from the heat. It was raw fear, the kind that makes you want to run while your legs refuse to move. "Jackson, focus," Eleanor whispered. Her voice sounded strangely small, even though she was less than 2 feet from me. She was holding the violin case like a shield. "I am focused," I replied, sweeping the flashlight across the treetops. I was armed, but I knew that against what we were about to face, the caliber of my gun meant nothing. His ammunition was music. We walked for another 10 minutes until we reached a small clearing near a dry creek bed. The place looked like a natural stage, ringed by ancient oak trees. This was it. This was where the melody of the missing musicians had led us. Eleanor opened the case. The violin, an old instrument she had inherited from her grandfather, gleamed in what little light we had. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and drew the bow across the strings. The sound that came out wasn't a rehearsal. It was a challenge. The melody she played was the fusion of the last notes we had recorded from the victims. It was dissonant, but driven by a pure bluegrass rhythm, fast, raw, and full of soul. It was the kind of music that makes the ground tremble, even when it's just a single violin. It was perfect bait. I stood still, tense, watching. Her sound traveled through the forest, and for a brief moment, the oppressive silence broke, replaced by that vibrant music. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then the forest answered. It wasn't a growl or an animal cry. It was music. It came from the darkness beyond the clearing, a sound that felt like it was made of rusted wire and old wood. It was a banjo, but played so fast and mournfully that the notes seemed to cry as they ran. It wasn't just an instrument, it was the sorrow of the mountains given form. The banjo's sound was cold and sharp. It wrapped itself around Eleanor's melody, trying to smother it like a poisonous vine choking a flower. Eleanor didn't stop. I saw in her eyes that fear had vanished, replaced by the fury of a challenged artist. She pressed the violin tighter against her neck and began to improvise. Her melody grew faster, more technical, more alive. She was telling a story with the violin, the story of every lost musician, every soul that thing had stolen. The musical duel truly began. The banjo, what we now thought of as the lament of the road, answered with insane speed. It sounded like it was laughing at us, mocking the human attempt to compete with something that was, at its core, folklore itself. I felt dizzy. The sound of the lament wasn't just audible, it was physical. It vibrated through my bones, made my stomach churn. I had to brace myself against a tree. It was as if its music was trying to convince me to lie down on the ground and give up. The melody was hypnotic, seductive in its pain. "Eleanor, be careful," I managed to shout, but my voice was nothing more than a pathetic whisper in that sonic storm. She ignored me, her face slick with sweat and tears. Yes, tears. Not of sadness, but of effort and connection. She was channeling the pain of all those victims. The lament pressed harder. The banjo's sound, which had seemed distant before, now felt as if it were right behind Eleanor. I swung the flashlight around. There was nothing there, but the intensity of the sound was crushing. Suddenly, Eleanor staggered back, stumbling. She had taken a musical blow. "What is it doing?" I shouted, adrenaline surging. It's showing me the victims," she cried, her voice hoarse. "Jackson, his melody is full of their voices. He doesn't kill, he collects sound. That was the missing piece. The lament wasn't a predator of flesh, it was a predator of art. It stole the purity of the final song, trapping the musician's soul inside its melodies so it could play them forever. The Bluegrass Highway wasn't just a road connecting towns. It was the path the musicians' souls traveled, and it was there to intercept them. Eleanor steadied herself. She knew that if she lost focus, the lament's melody would swallow hers, and she would become the next note in that macabre collection. She changed the rhythm again. What had been fast bluegrass became a violin lament, slow, deep, and filled with restrained rage. It was the melody of defiance, the song of someone who refuses to be forgotten. The lament seemed confused. The banjo slowed for a second. It wasn't used to being confronted with pure pain, distilled and thrown back at equal intensity. It was used to absorbing, not receiving. Eleanor saw the opening. She pulled the bow with a force I'd never seen, striking a chord that was as dissonant as the vanished musician's melody, but carried a note of hope. It was the sound of a string snapping, of a spell breaking. When she played that note, the forest reacted violently. It wasn't just the lament's sound that stopped. Everything did. The air felt thin, and I swear I felt the ground shudder, as if the earth itself had been punched in the gut. A scream, but not a human one, and not musical. It was the sound of deep frustration, as if something vast and ancient had been wounded. I aimed the flashlight toward the source. I saw only the swift movement of something like dark smoke, dissipating between the trees at an impossible speed. No body, no defined shape, just shadow and sound. The lament had retreated. Eleanor let the violin drop slightly, gasping for breath. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the bow. "Jackson," she whispered. Her voice was the most frightening thing of all, because it was almost empty. I saw it. I saw where he keeps the music. I ran to her, gripping her arms. "Where, Eleanor? Where is he hiding?" "Not in the forest. He only comes here to hunt. He goes back home, Jackson. He goes back to where the music is loudest, where he can hear his victims." She caught her breath, her gaze fixed on nothing. "The lament. He lives in the old Majestic Theater, right off the Bluegrass Highway. That abandoned theater that burned down 50 years ago. The Majestic Theater. I knew the place. It had once been a legendary gathering spot for bluegrass musicians in the 1950s and 60s, before a mysterious fire shut it down and claimed a few lives. The legend said the fire had started after a fight between musicians, jealousy over the perfect melody. But why there? The place is in ruins, I argued, pulling Eleanor away from the clearing. I knew the lament could return at any moment. It's perfect, Jackson. It's the final stage. The music of the musicians who died in that fire never left. The lament uses the theater as an amplifier. He's collecting souls and playing them for an audience of ghosts. We ran out of the forest, the night's silence now feeling like relief, even if it was only the calm before the storm. As we drove back toward town, I could barely process what had happened. We weren't hunting a murderer. We were chasing a supernatural parasite that fed on art. Eleanor, in the passenger seat, was calmer now, but her gaze was distant. She was listening to something I couldn't hear. Eleanor, what else did you see when you were connected to his melody? She took a moment to answer, fingers tapping lightly against the violin case. He showed me the last victim. His name was Caleb. He was a harmonica player, the youngest of them all. The lament hasn't fully absorbed his melody yet. Caleb is resisting Jackson. He's playing the same note over and over, trying to slow the process. And where is he inside the Majestic? On the main stage in the middle of the ashes. The lament will finish the job at dawn, when the theater is colder. We have to get there before the sun rises, before Caleb's melody fades forever. The urgency hit us like a lightning strike. We were no longer looking for a body or a criminal. We were in a race against time to save a boy's soul, and the only way to do that was to beat the lament at its own game, on the stage where it was invincible. We got back to our motel room around 3 in the morning. There was no chance of sleeping. Eleanor was cleaning and inspecting the violin as if she were preparing a weapon. I was studying the city map, looking for the best route to the Majestic. The Majestic Theater stood in the oldest, most abandoned part of Lexington, a monument of dark brick and shattered windows, right along the side of the highway. What do we do when we get there, Eleanor? I asked quietly. We can't just go in shooting. She looked up, cold determination in her eyes. No. We go in playing. Jackson, the lament can only be defeated if we break the cycle. It uses melancholy and fear to absorb music. We have to give it something it can't absorb. What? Rock and roll? She smiled faintly, the first time in hours. No. Something older. Pure. We have to give it the melody of pure joy. The lament feeds on sadness and loss. The only thing that can truly hurt it is unrestrained happiness. I looked at her violin. The same violin that had just dueled a folkloric entity and survived. But it has all the musicians' souls in the Majestic. It'll have a chorus of hundreds of instruments against your violin. It doesn't matter. I have to play the happiest song I've ever created. The song I wrote for my grandfather before he died. The song he said would make even the dead dance. We were planning a musical heist against a ghost. It sounded like a B-movie plot, but it was our reality. We didn't have time to overthink it. We took only the essentials. Eleanor brought the violin and a few spare strings. I took the flashlight, the gun, and a sledgehammer I kept in the trunk, for clearing a path if we needed to, or maybe just to make myself feel useful. As we left the motel, the sky was still dark, but we could smell dawn on the way. Jackson, Eleanor said as we got into the car. She was clutching the violin to her chest. If I start playing the lament's melody, if it gets hold of me, you have to stop me. You have to break my violin. My stomach went cold. Don't say that. It's not going to happen. You have to promise me, Jackson. I can't become another note in its collection. It's better for the instrument to die than for the music to be trapped. I looked at her, at the resolve in her eyes, and knew she meant every word. She was ready to sacrifice her own art to stop that thing. I promise, I said, my voice thick. But you won't need it. We're going in, we're saving Caleb, and you're going to play that happy song until the lament begs us to stop. The drive to the Majestic was short, but it felt like we were crossing the entire state. The Bluegrass Highway, busy with farms and white fences during the day, was now a ghost road, washed in the dim light of broken street lamps. We parked about 2 blocks from the theater. The Majestic was a pitiful sight. It had once been an imposing building, but now it was just a shell of scorched brick, with a cracked facade and a partially collapsed roof. It looked as if the fire from 50 years ago had frozen in time, waiting for the next act. The silence around the theater was different from the forest silence. In the woods, it had been anticipation. Here it was wait, as if the walls were absorbing every sound from the city. We approached from the side, where a rusted service door had been broken open for decades. The smell of mold, dust, and soot was overwhelming. "Ready for our final show?" I asked, gripping the sledgehammer. Eleanor nodded, taking a deep breath. "The stage is ours." We went in. Inside, the darkness was almost solid. We switched on our flashlights. The lobby was ruined, with crumbling plaster and torn seats piled everywhere. The sound started almost immediately, but it was subtle. It wasn't the fury of the lament we'd heard in the forest. It was background music, a soft, constant cacophony. "Do you hear that?" Eleanor whispered. "Yeah. Sounds like a badly tuned orchestra." "It's not out of tune. It's every melody it's stolen, all playing at once, on a loop. It's the soundtrack of its prison." We slipped through the side corridors, avoiding the main stage for the moment. I was looking for Caleb. If he was resisting, he had to be close to the lament, but not fully absorbed yet. The sound guided us. The closer we got to the stage, the clearer the music became. We started to pick out instruments, guitars, harmonicas, banjos, upright basses, all playing different notes, but locked into the same melancholic rhythm. And in the middle of that chaos, there was one stubborn, high, repetitive note. Caleb's harmonica. He was there, fighting. We reached the side of the stage. The Majestic was enormous. The audience area was a mountain of rubble and broken chairs. The stage itself was relatively intact, but covered in ash. And there, at the center of the stage, was the lament. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was what Eleanor had seen in the forest, but more concentrated. It was a tall, slender figure made of shadow and smoke, vaguely human in shape. It seemed to be sitting on an invisible chair, and in its skeletal hands of smoke, it held a banjo. The instrument looked real, made of dark wood, but when it played, the sound seemed to come from the shadow's own throat. And there, near the lament's feet, was Caleb. The boy was sitting on the floor, slumped against a broken column, pale and weak. He was playing a harmonica, repeating the same shrill, high note. It was the only note of resistance in that sea of stolen melodies. The lament was watching Caleb patiently. It was waiting for the boy to give up. "We have to get him out of there now," I said, lifting the sledgehammer. "No. If you make noise, it'll absorb Caleb immediately. I have to start playing. I have to distract it and break its concentration." Eleanor already had the violin on her shoulder. The plan was suicidal. If she missed a note, if joy wasn't strong enough, she'd be offering her own soul on a platter. "Go, Eleanor. I'm with you." She stepped out of the side shadows of the stage, into the dim light filtering through the broken windows. The lament stopped playing. The ghostly orchestra in the background fell silent as well, as if every trapped musician were paying attention. The silence that followed was louder than any sound. The lament turned its shadowy head toward Eleanor. It had no eyes, but I felt it looking at her, examining the new melody that had just appeared. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She closed her eyes and began to play. It wasn't bluegrass. It wasn't a lament. It was the purest, most vibrant music I had ever heard. A fast melody full of leaps, as if it were made of children's laughter and sunlight. It was her grandfather's melody, the song that made the dead dance. The lament recoiled slightly. The smoke that formed its body began to tremble. It didn't understand that music. Eleanor's melody had no fear, no sadness, no loss. There was nothing for it to absorb. It tried to strike back. Its banjo began to play, but this time it wasn't melancholy. It was rage. It rapped Eleanor's melody in aggressive notes, trying to force her joy to turn into pain. The duel was now despair versus hope. I used the distraction. Crouching low in the shadows, I moved toward Caleb. The energy around the lament was cold and sharp, like stepping into a freezer. "Caleb, my name's Jackson. We came to get you. Hang on." I touched his shoulder. He didn't react, but his harmonica let out another one of those stubborn notes. As I tried to pull Caleb away, the lament sensed my presence. It broke off from Eleanor for an instant and lashed out with a banjo sound that cracked through the air like a whip. The sound hit me in the chest. I dropped to my knees, feeling a searing pain, not physical but emotional. It was the sound of total loss, of endless loneliness. His melody was telling me I was alone, that Emma was going to die, and that I should give up. I fought the nausea and the pain. I looked at Emma. She was struggling with the violin, her face twisted with effort. She saw I was in danger and, without breaking the rhythm of joy, she slipped a warning note into the melody. That note was enough. The lament turned its attention back to Emma, the real challenge. Emma was playing with everything she had. Her melody was expanding, filling the theater, and I swear I heard her violin strings groan under the pressure. It was the sound of life, confronting death. The lament, furious, began to play a chaotic, deafening rhythm. The entire theater started to shake. Dust and soot rained down from the ceiling. I used those seconds of distraction. I grabbed Caleb and hauled him back behind the pillar, away from the sonic battlefield. The boy was limp, but alive. "Emma, I've got Caleb. Get out of there!" I yelled. But she couldn't stop. The lament was cornered. Its smoke was thinning, it was weakening. The sound of joy was corroding its prison of sorrow. The lament made its final move. It raised the banjo and tore into it with demonic ferocity. It wasn't music anymore, it was pure noise. And suddenly I heard it. Not just the lament's banjo, but the entire ghost orchestra. Hundreds of stolen instruments, playing the peak of their pain, all aimed at Emma. Her melody wavered. I saw Emma's body falter. The lament was trying to break into her mind, force her to feel the pain of every victim, so she would give up and join the choir. I saw what was about to happen. She was about to be absorbed. I remembered my promise. Break the violin. Save the music. I dropped Caleb to the floor, grabbed the sledgehammer, and ran toward the stage. I had to be faster than the melody. Emma's eyes were shut, the violin trembling in her hands. The melody of joy was fading, being replaced by the lament. I reached her side. The lament was only a few yards away, its smoke thickening, ready to deliver the final blow. I didn't look at Emma. I raised the sledgehammer, aimed for the violin, and swung with all my strength. The impact sounded like a cannon shot in the silence that followed. The violin exploded into splinters of wood and string, and the last note of joy, cut off, echoed through the theater. Emma screamed, a cry of pain and shock. But the silence lasted only an instant. The lament, without the resistance of that melody, burst into smoke. Not into disappearance, but into rage. The smoke flooded the theater, and I felt the piercing cold and pure anger. I grabbed Emma, who was sobbing and clutching the violin's wreckage. "It didn't leave," she shouted, her voice thick with despair. "I broke the weapon, but it's still here. We have to get out." I dragged her off the stage, grabbed Caleb, and we ran for the exit. The lament's smoke followed us. It moved through the ruins, trying to wrap around us. I knew that by destroying the violin we'd interrupted the spell, but we'd only angered the creature. Now the lament didn't need music to take us. It was furious. We made it to the service door. I kicked debris out of the way and shoved Emma and Caleb outside into the cold pre-dawn air. Emma was inconsolable, staring at the broken wood in her hands. Her weapon was gone. "Jack, we lost," she whispered. "No," I said, looking back at the majestic theater, where black smoke was starting to gather at the doorway. "We only lost the first round. We found out what it is and we saved the boy. And you still have the melody in your head, Emma." The lament couldn't hide anymore. We knew where it was. As we ran for the car, I looked at Caleb. He was breathing, still unconscious. And in his hand he was gripping the harmonica. I looked at Emma, holding the violin pieces like relics. The lament of the road had been confronted, but the final duel was still to come. And now, without the violin, we needed a new plan and a new instrument to play the music that would send folklore back to hell. And I knew exactly where we could find a stage and a new weapon, right in the heart of the Bluegrass Highway. We were going to bring it into town. The show wasn't over. To be continued. We had the key, but it wasn't a metal key. It was a key of sound. That final rhythm, that broken beat that I had caught in the last bar of poor Bobby Ray's song, was more than music. It was a point on the map. Jack was hunched over old Kentucky road maps, the kind that show even the dirt roads the county forgot. "Look, Emma," he murmured, dragging a coffee-stained finger over the paper. "The beat was do, re, mi, sol, and then the long pause, right? What does that remind you of on the road?" I closed my eyes, replaying the score we'd assembled, mixing the notes with mileage markers. The county had given us access to Bluegrass Highway construction records, and I'd noticed something strange. "Jack, they aren't notes. They're place names. Think with me: do for Dove's Creek, re for Redding, mi for Milltown, sol for Soloway. Those places aren't in highway order, but they form a strange quadrant. That long pause at the end of the melody, that silence that swallowed sound, was the point of convergence. It's the center of the quadrant," I said, a shiver running through me. "Where those four imaginary lines cross. Jack, it takes us back to the forest, but not the part we searched before. It's the Hollow Creek area." Hollow Creek was famous in the region. People said the water ran so fast it made a constant wailing sound, and that it was where the most ambitious musicians went to practice, chasing perfect acoustics. And, of course, it was home to our macabre folklore. The echo collector. "That's where it's waiting," Jack confirmed, letting the map drop. His eyes were bloodshot with exhaustion and adrenaline. "It didn't hide. It built a stage." We got in the car. The night was sealed shut, starless, and fog rose off the asphalt like steam from a cauldron. The closer we got to Hollow Creek, the more the car radio crackled. And it wasn't ordinary static. It sounded like someone trying to tune 1,000 stations at once, but every one of them was playing the same thing, warped, blended music, as if hundreds of instruments were screaming together. I turned the radio off. The silence afterward was worse. We reached the meeting point. It wasn't a house or a shack. It was a clearing in the brush, with only the pillars of an old railroad bridge that had collapsed decades ago. Rotten wood, thick with moss, overlooked a ravine where Hollow Creek moaned. And there, in the middle of the clearing, was a figure. It had its back to us, sitting on a makeshift stool, holding an old banjo that looked like it had been built from coffin wood. It was tall and thin, wearing clothes that looked like they'd come out of a 1920s photo album. It didn't look threatening, but the aura around it was heavy, cold. The echo collector. "Emma, stay behind me," Jack whispered, drawing his gun. "No," I said, gripping his arm. "If it were an ordinary man, it would have run. It's waiting for us. And it doesn't care about bullets. It cares about music." The figure began to play. It wasn't music you'd hear on the radio. It was the saddest, most perfect melody I'd ever heard, pain and joy from every musician it had taken, stitched into a single song. I recognized fragments. The quick bite of Sarah's violin, the deep moan of Marcus's upright bass, the clean final chord of Bobby Ray. It was a trap, a sonic lure. The echo collector turned its head slowly, and I saw its face. No fangs, no monstrous grin. Just a blank, pale face with eyes like dark holes. No expression, yet the music spilling from its hands was full of stolen feeling. "You came," its voice didn't come from a throat, but from the air around us, a whisper amplified by the banjo's sound. "You brought the last piece. Curiosity. The ending of your song." It stopped playing, and the silence dropped like a ton of bricks. You tried to understand the map. But the music was never a map. It was an offering. Every musician who came here, searching for the perfect note, the immortal melody, was calling to me. And I helped them find eternity. I keep their melody. My stomach turned. The musicians weren't victims of an ordinary killer. They were victims of their own hunger for perfection, and this thing was the perverse guardian of that perfection. Jack stepped forward, gun steady. "It's over," Drop the instrument. The echo collector smiled, slow and unnatural. It didn't look at Jack. It looked at me. You're the only one who can hear the break, aren't you? The flaw in the rhythm. You don't chase perfection. You chase truth. It started playing again, but now the music was aimed at me. A hypnotic song, seductive, promising to reveal every secret about music I'd ever wanted to know. I felt my legs wanting to move forward. Perfection was tempting. It's what every artist dreams of. But I remembered what we'd learned. Perfect music is sterile, cold. What it stole was the life in music. The human part that misses, that stumbles, that sobs, that goes hoarse. You're not keeping their music, I said, my voice shaking but firm. You're imprisoning it. You're draining the soul to get a clean sound. But a clean sound has no heart. I pulled out what I always carried, an old, dented harmonica, my father's gift, because he taught me that the purest blues comes from dirt and pain. You want perfection? I challenged. Then listen to imperfection. I put the harmonica to my lips and began to play. It wasn't pretty. It was a dirty, scraped-up blues, full of notes colliding and high, raw groans. I played the pain of loss, the frustration of never finding the right note, the rage of seeing so much talent swallowed by ambition. I played the sound of the road, dust, loneliness. Music that was alive, full of flaws. The echo collector's reaction was immediate and violent. The moment the rough sound hit the air, it recoiled as if shocked. The banjo's melody buckled, the strings seeming to scream. Stop! Its voice went sharp, distorted, like a scratched record. It's filthy. It's ugly. It's real. I shouted, playing harder, forcing air through the instrument until my lungs burned. Its body began to glow, a ghostly bluish light, the color of the Bluegrass Highway at night. I realized it wasn't flesh and bone, but a concentration of sonic energy. It was the physical manifestation of the insatiable desire for flawless music. The music it had stolen began to spill out of it. Not a perfect song anymore, chaotic screams, hysterical laughter, a whirl of lost notes crashing into one another. Instruments scattered around the clearing, ones I hadn't noticed before, began to vibrate wildly. They were the missing musician's instruments. The banjo in the echo collector's hand snapped. The wood split. It let out a scream that wasn't human. It was the sound of 1,000 melodies coming apart. The blue light detonated in a blinding flash. Jack yanked me back, shielding my head as the sonic shockwave hit us. It felt like the air was ripped out of our lungs. When I could open my eyes again, the echo collector was gone. No ashes, no body. Only the wooden stool tipped over and, scattered around it, the instruments of all the missing. Sarah's violin, Marcus's upright bass, the bagpipes of a piper who'd vanished years ago, and the banjo it had used. I crawled to the banjo. It was broken clean in half, the strings snapped. Where is it? Jack asked, voice hoarse, gun still in hand. I picked up the broken banjo, the wood cold against my palm. It's gone, Jack. Or rather, it fell apart. Its perfection couldn't survive the sound of human truth. It was only an echo that needed other people to exist. The musicians, though, they didn't come back. The soul of their music had been consumed. All that remained was the sound. We spent the rest of the night searching the area. We found a small cave hidden beneath the bridge pillars, and inside, confirmation of our nightmare, old clothes, personal belongings, and piles of scribbled sheet music, every page ending with the same broken beat. We called the local police. The problem with being a private detective who deals with folklore is that you can't tell the truth. We made up a story. We talked about a serial killer, a lunatic who used music as bait and who, in the end, killed himself while trying to blow up the site with some homemade device, which explained the flash and the boom of that sonic explosion. The police accepted the lunatic version. It was easier to swallow than a specter that feeds on chords. The instruments were catalogued as evidence, and the missing were finally given closure, even though the truth of what happened to them was far stranger. We left Kentucky 2 days later. The Bluegrass Highway looked different. Not more mysterious, more haunted. I couldn't hear a street song anymore without wondering how close it was to perfection, and what price the musician was willing to pay. In the car, Jack drove in silence for hours. He turned the radio on, low, soft instrumental music. "Are you okay?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the road. I looked over. I was holding the dented harmonica in my hand. "I heard their music, Jack. I felt what they were chasing. It's a terrible thirst, to be the best, to make your art last forever." "But you didn't get taken," he said. "You played dirty. And it worked." I gave a weak smile. I think the lesson is that we have to be careful what we call perfect. Life is a mess. And the most honest art is the kind that reflects that. We were nearing the state line, morning sun striking the windshield. Jack turned the radio up a little. It was a simple country song about losing a love on the road. Not complex. Just sincere. And then I heard it. Right in the middle of the song, for a fraction of a second, something that didn't belong. A note that cracked, a tiny sob in the rhythm, almost inaudible. I froze. "Jack," I said softly, "did you hear that?" "What?" "The guitar solo." "No. That little mistake. That hitch in the melody." Jack glanced at me, confused. "I didn't hear anything, Emma. Must be the radio." I didn't say anything else. But I knew. The echo collector had fallen apart, but the desire for perfection, the pull of immortal music, was still there, hanging over the hot asphalt of the Bluegrass Highway. The mystery was solved. The musicians had been found, in their macabre way. But I knew that somewhere, a new street musician with an old guitar and a dream that was too big was starting to play, chasing the note that would carry them into eternity. And the echo collector, or whatever was left of it, would always be waiting. In that moment, I understood. We could leave Kentucky, but the music of the road, and its price, would stay with me forever. We would always be listening, alert for that broken beat, because it was the only thing separating us from the perfect melody and the emptiness that came with it. And that, my friends, is the most terrifying part of this whole story.